we're going to do today. As I probably have remarked upon already, we are reading this book dreadfully slowly for my taste. What that means for us is there are going to be days like today. Basically, everything leading up to today has probably felt a little bit scattershot. That's because the book we're reading is a little bit scattershot, right? But I think all of our conversations leading up to this point have been pretty tethered together. There's certain themes we've been tracking through the book. Today, it's not as if some of the elements I'm going to point out to you don't tie into any of those themes. I think they do, but a lot of these are smaller. You almost might call them shallow dives, just stuff we haven't had time to talk about up till now, and they, for the most part, probably don't require as much conversation as some of the, like we talked about the epitaph last time. That's 20-30 minute conversation we had about that. Not going to be as much of that today, probably. The other thing I want on your radar, at some point in class, I'm going to warm us up. I don't want to just throw you guys in, okay? I have things we're going to talk about, but at some point, I will open the floor to you. If there's anything in the book at all that you found interesting or you're not sure about, so you have questions, anything at all, that'll be your time to shine. You'll bring it to our attention. Okay, to begin with, and I'm going to give you page numbers, but again, I'm hopeful that most of these you can either use your notes or your memory. Feel free to flip to the pages as I give them to you, but again, it's like the very first one. We're on page 177. We're going to talk about Lazaro. We have not talked about him to this point. But we mentioned before, like with Weary, we do this with a lot of the characters. We'll see him at war, and there'll be a certain kind of a way, right? Mm-hmm. But then we'll look into their backstory, and thinking of Weary, it's like, oh, okay, he's still probably not my favorite person, but you see how he grew up. He's like, it's understandable. It makes a little bit of sense, right? So he's a little more sympathetic is how we talked about Weary, whenever that was. Lazaro is a special case because we see him at war, and he's awful. But then you see him at home, and he's awful. He's still terrible. He's perfect for war. Well, no, I mean maybe, but more on that in a second perhaps. But at the very least, to my mind, he is really the only character in the book who's just like not redeemable at all. There's nothing, at no point do you read anything about Lazaro and you're like, oh, he's all right, he's a decent guy. For instance, 177, when we hear about his backstory, he has an interaction with a dog.
Oh, no.
Okay, good. See, I was hoping, my last class acted like they didn't remember this. I found it pretty memorable. A dog bites him, right? What does Lazaro do about that?
He basically sticks like a bunch of like knives or something
like shrapnel. Yeah.
Basically sticks it in a steak.
Shrapnel.
Good. And he gets the dog to eat it, and then of course the dog bleeds out. It's pretty fucking horrific, actually. Yeah. And Lazaro like watches and like celebrates over this.
Yeah, I remember reading this and I'm just like, I'm gonna be sick.
Well, that's a valid response to have. You know, that means you're a person.
Yeah, complete fucking psychopath.
Yeah. Well, and again, on the one hand, I understand that kind of summary of Lazaro, right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You read something like that. Clearly, that guy is not operating probably according to whatever sane measurements we have of people, right? Hopefully. Yeah. But the issue with that is if you stop there, you're kind of limiting what you can understand about Lazaro. Again, at no point am I saying, I started with this, he's not a sympathetic character. He's not. But I do think there's more going on. So for instance, he's talking about this dog, 176, 177. He says about this, I'm just trying to jog your memory, it's the sweetest thing there is. I'm so upset right now. Those are all adults. They're all very well dressed and smiling, and I wish they would do it elsewhere. I'm sorry. It really kills me. Like, those are the people, they're in charge. They're coming from like a meeting, and it's like, you know what this is, right? You know what goes on right now? Why are you here laughing? Get the fuck out of the building. Anyway. All right. Lazaro says, it's the sweetest thing there is. People fuck with me, and Jesus Christ, are they ever fucking sorry? I laugh like hell. I don't care if it's a guy or a dame. If the president of the United States fucked around with me, I'd fix him good. You should have seen what I did to a dog one time. And then he tells us about the dog.
But then after that whole dog thing, there is something interesting about him.
Well, time out on that. We gotta do the dog thing first. Because again, we have to figure out what's going on with him. What's he talking about? He says, he keeps using this phrase, fucking with him. The dog, the president of the United States, anybody fucks with him, he says. And we have this phrase. What does that really mean, though? What's he saying? What does it mean to fuck with somebody in the way that he is using it?
Like to cross him.
Like, bother him.
Well, it's stronger than that, right? Given his, but yeah. Like, I like the idea of crossing him. Well, I mean, let's go with that. What does it mean to cross somebody, really? Somebody crosses you.
Like to do wrong against
To wrong someone, right? And look, a dog biting you, that's them wronging you in a way, I suppose, right? It's not a thing we like to have happen, okay? What's his response to that, though? To being wronged, as he says. It's revenge. He uses the term revenge. He will always, he tells us, take revenge, no matter what it is. If it's a guy or a dame, if it's a dog, right? He will take revenge. So then we got to ask, given what we've said, it starts with, according to Lazaro, someone fucking with him, someone crossing him, someone wronging him. He will take revenge upon that person. What is revenge? What does it mean to do that? You think?
to get justice for yourself and your own personal viewpoint.
So like to get even, this idea, right?
Yeah.
I think that's how most of us would define it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how Lazaro defines it?
No.
No.
He goes further, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, revenge against the dog would be, he would bite the dog, I guess, right? I mean, that's fair, that's even. He goes a step beyond that, he takes things further. Again, Lazaro always does this. He tells one of the British officers, I'm gonna hire a guy to get you later, right? He kills Billy, right? We hear this numerous times in the book. He's gonna assassinate Billy later on. Well, now here's a question, and this is a weird path to go, but how does revenge, not just where does it end up? Because I think he takes things further than like justice or even. But how does that revenge work? So if we use the situation of the dog bites him, right? That's pretty much what a dog has available, is teeth, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Lazaro goes and buys a steak, I guess. Goes and gets whatever metal thing, I don't know where he gets those.
This is like a clock spring.
Yeah, okay, good. And he puts him in the steak, and then he tricks the dog into eating it. So he's using subterfuge. Like he's using I'll put it to you this way. If it was you versus a dog, like a good-sized dog, fist fight, you may not come out on top. You get shot, but it's actually pretty damn even if it's a good-sized dog. And in some cases not, like some cases you might be fucked depending on the breed, right? Like it's not, okay? Lazaro is going to use his advantages, always. In this case, he's got thumbs and money and a brain that'll let him like do all these things, right? When it comes to the British soldier, he has connections. He says, I know people, right? Back home. And when it comes to Billy, he's got a rifle of some kind and distance, like he's gonna snipe him. It's always taking things further than even and cheating, basically, if you want to think. Because it comes, we would think about it as a question of fairness. That's not what interests him. It's not about being fair. It can't be, given the outcomes and the means.
It's more about like getting even with them. It's less about that. It's more it's like making sure they never hurt you again.
I mean, yeah, but even I don't know that that's what interests him. I mean, to me, it sounds like he would relish the opportunity for someone to fuck with him again, because that would just give him like another chance to take revenge. But if he's not worried about being even, he takes things further. Like what's he really worried about? What does his revenge look like? It's different from, I think, how we normally think of it.
I don't want to say it's sadistic, but...
Well, I mean, it is, yeah. He's super sadistic. Oh, that's fair. But again, what I'm trying to pinpoint for us is, I think there's something at the heart of all that. It goes beyond revenge. It goes beyond sadism. I think there's something that motivates all of that. And it's going to sound super weird when we get there.
I don't want to say, like, to make him feel superior.
Why not?
But I get implications of that.
Yeah. Well, again, like when we say he's not interested in being even, he's interested in coming out on top, basically, right? Like if there's a score that he's going to settle, we have this phrase, he wants his score to be higher. This is about winning. He wants to win. Against the dog, against the British soldier, against Billy. He wants to come out on top, always, no matter what it is. This is about competition. And again, we're not used to thinking of it this way, being competitive in this way, but I think that's what it is, right? I hesitate to use this phrase because this will get you into trouble in papers. It got some of you into trouble with your first papers. But if there's one toxically masculine character in this book, it's Lazaro. And that's what it looks like. Like he's almost two-dimensional. Everybody else is three-dimensional. You see other aspects to them. Lazaro is very simple. He's got like one motivating factor, and it guides his whole life. And he takes it too far. Like that's really what it is. All that is to say, you had some kind of rejoinder, and I cut you off at the time, but you said there was something else you wanted to talk about after the dog with Lazaro.
Well, they say it straight up. If Lazaro never hurt anyone who didn't hurt him first.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting anecdote. At
Well,
least it got my attention.
For sure. It's he has like a weird code of honor almost, right? Like that again, that's kind of how we would think of that, I think, a lot of the time. But what's interesting, if we think about what the book is, and especially how Vonnegut or the narrator, how the narrator talks about these characters and some of the bigger ideas in the book, you could argue, potentially, that a lot of the countries in the book feel like they've been fucked with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, generally, it's how wars start. Whether it's a pretense or not, that's a whole other conversation. But generally, wars get kicked off because somebody feels like someone else crossed them, wronged them, fucked with them, to talk like Lazaro does.
And the countries don't want to get even.
It's not about being even once the stuff kicks off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an honor to it if you're attacked so it's interesting to me how much Lazaro in his two-dimensionality mirrors like this socio-political sort of war ethic, to sound super fancy in front of you guys real quick. Look at me. But yeah, it's like Vonnegut is really good, I think, especially in this book, of showing you the same kind of an idea according to different perspectives. So the Lazaro had never heard anyone like that sounds honorable, that's, but then you see what it actually looks like. And like, for instance, he thinks Billy has crossed him. What did Billy do?
Nothing.
Nothing. He did nothing. Weary said he did, and that was enough.
I always think that Lazaro just is looking for an opportunity.
There's that too. Given the kind of guy he
He's
is, that's not an unfair characterization, right?
He's just
So
the kind
all of a
guy
sudden that calls that honor into question. Like I don't think it's that simple. It sounds good when you say it like that, but it doesn't get applied quite in those terms, right?
Yeah.
Another character we haven't talked about at all. We will definitely talk about him next time, but I want to introduce him a little bit right here. It'll be on 191. And again, we're just touching on these, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time helping you find it. I mean, we can just talk about him. Next to Lazaro was the poor old high school teacher, Edgar Derby. And this is the quotation I'm interested in about him. Mournfully pregnant with patriotism and middle age and imaginary wisdom and so on. So we got to stop. Just leave it. Don't even. Yeah, it's a whole. Mournfully pregnant. Already, and we've talked about this, but if you read a thing that strikes you as odd, I want you to start noticing that. You're used to hearing about people that are pregnant. You may even know a couple. Mournfully so is odd. We can agree on that? What do you think that means? To be mournfully pregnant? What do you think mournfully means? We'll start there.
Well,
Grief, pain.
That's yeah. So worthy of grief or grieving, right? To be mournfully pregnant?
Pregnant with grief?
Well, I mean, no, because he's pregnant with patriotism, middle age, and imaginary wisdom. Let's talk about those, and that might help us think about what's so mournful about these qualities. Imaginary wisdom. I feel like that's a pretty easy one.
he's only 40.
Okay, so what? Like what are we saying? Like wisdom, again, we know, I think, what that means. Like you're wise, you know a whole lot of things about the world and life. What's imaginary wisdom, though?
Basically faking it till you make it, but basically just like I'm this old, I should have all this wisdom, but really you really don't.
Well, yeah. Well, and given the way I think he thinks he does, right? Like the way that's phrased, to me it sounds like Derby is pretty convinced of his own wisdom. The narrative tells us his imaginary would suggest otherwise. More in a second on why that may be mournful, but that doesn't sound great. Middle age, I'm not there yet, but it's down the street. How do you guys read that? He's mournfully pregnant with middle age. It's very far away from most of you, so I mean,
I don't know, like maybe he's showing it.
yeah. Well, I mean, the question is how. But sure. Yeah, go ahead.
If a person is pregnant, they're showing it.
Yeah.
I was thinking he was like born with it.
You're not born with middle age, unless you're like Benjamin Button, but
You're showing your age, you're showing the fact that your wisdom is not all there, given your current situation.
yeah. Well, this may help. It may make it worse, but this may help. There was another character that we've already talked about who seemed to be mournfully pregnant with imaginary wisdom. Seemed to think he knew more than he really did, I would say. Any ideas who that might be? Seemed to think he had a handle on things when he really didn't.
Weary?
Yeah. His true war story, right? Isn't that in essence, what got him caught, what gets him killed.
Yeah.
He thinks he's safe in Nazi Germany in 1940, whatever it is, right? Like, he thinks he's comfortable. He thinks he's at home. That's not the place to be comfortable. He thinks he knows more than he does, and it gets him. Derby, by virtue of his age and his relative experience compared to the rest of the people he's around, thinks he's more on top of things than he is. He's going to write a letter to his wife here in a few pages. We're not going to go find it, but it's something to the effect of, we only get the first bit, but he says, hey, there was an election today. Guess who won? And then there's an ellipsis. We don't see the end. He gets elected leader, right, of their troops.
See the election. It's like,
It's not even close to how he describes it, is it?
no.
He wins by default.
Yeah, he quote unquote wins the same way a dictator running for president quote unquote wins, and then there's no
gets
other
nominated,
opponents.
somebody else, like no one really votes. It's kind of a farce. That's not going in that letter, right? That's not part of his true war story. In the same way, Weary telling his true war story to his family back when he envisions what it's going to be, it's not quite right. It's not really accurate. He's not so dissimilar from Weary, even though he's much older. We would assume, he assumes, much wiser, right? Not so much. Not so much. And he's mournfully pregnant with these things, that he's full of them. And that's mournful for something. It's worth grieving over for some reason. All right. I told you today is going to be like a little bit of a shallow dice type of thing. Next thing I want to talk about is actually on 193. So it's only, if you found the thing about Derby, you just turn the page for us. We are finally in Dresden. We are very near the end of the book, but we are finally in Dresden. Billy is dressed like a damn fool. He kind of always is, but especially toward the end of the book, he's got like the jacket that doesn't fit. It's got like a fur collar, and it's tight and small and silly, and many other. He looks clownish, right? We refer to him as a clown several times.
He's wrapped up in a sheet.
Yeah, he looks like an idiot.
I mean, he's practical. He's warm. That's what he says in chapter 7. At least he's warm.
Yeah. They run into, because they're in Dresden now, so they're among German citizens. Okay. He runs into a surgeon who takes offense to Billy's outfit. The surgeon tells him, "I take it you find war a very comical thing." Later he says, "Did you expect us to laugh?" And then a little after that he says, "You thought we would enjoy being mocked? And do you feel proud to represent America as you do?" He's just saying all this to Billy. Billy doesn't really say anything because Billy doesn't say anything.
Billy's Billy.
Why is the surgeon so offended by what Billy looks like, do you think? Because that's what this is, right? He's deeply offended by the way Billy is dressed.
Basically, we're in the middle of a war, the biggest war that we've ever seen, and you're supposed to be our honorable enemy, and you come in looking like a damn fool. Well, that devalues our.
Good. No, for sure. So again, the point you're kind of making here is, and this is what's interesting about it, right? Like we've talked about this in different ways, all the way back to old men playing basketball. You think about the speaker sizes those old men up according to standards that we all have. We understand he's sizing himself up too. But here it's this surgeon, this German citizen, is measuring himself according to his enemy. Like it's better for him if Billy looks like what? Yeah, like we would expect. Because your military, I suppose, has vanquished this person, has captured this person, and that shines back on you, right? Like you look better for it. Somebody in my first class gave the example, it's silly, but if you got in a fist fight with a literal clown, that's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
Because either you whoop bozo's ass. And then everybody at the party is like, what is wrong with you? Or,
You get beat by a fucking
and then
clown.
there's no winning. Yeah, what's up?
I might be going too far deep into this too, but they also wore white, the surgeons and the nurses, so you'd be thinking of mocking him as well, because of the white bed sheet.
Oh yeah, well maybe. That's, I don't know how to feel about that.
Like I said, it could be-
No. I mean, I'm chewing on it.
What you see in movies and what
Yeah.
you see in historical, the nurses and the doctors and
Yeah.
wore white, if you wore a white bed sheet.
Possibly. And possibly. But at the very least, he feels mocked due to, again, like all of a sudden what we're acknowledging here is there's a direct connection between enemies. They measure themselves according to each other here. And the surgeon doesn't appreciate it. He's not who he's supposed to be.
I don't know if this is too far of a reach here.
Okay.
I kind of feel that, like, everybody takes offense to Billy.
Most people do. Yeah, in one way or
He's just
another.
objectively bad.
Easy on the objectively bad.
I don't know.
There's very few of those folks. I'm
I
just,
think,
you know.
like, almost in a sense of, like, this, he goes against every single expectation of this war.
Yeah.
He is a under-equipped, unexperienced pacifist
Yeah.
who's never dressed properly.
Well, he's like a pacifist in life too. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Just like,
Never gets
yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Never gets the equipment he needs.
Yeah.
Dresses like a darn fool. Has a mental breakdown when he should be enjoying himself in reprieve.
Yeah.
And it's just like he sucks. He's like a 4 out of 10.
Well.
He disappoints the expectations of the people who are still seeing honor in this war.
Well, isn't that what we're talking about? Is this question of expectation, right? I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with your point about Billy liking him. I don't think he's particularly likable.
No, I don't even mean liking him. I mean, he can. There's still some likable features about him somewhere in there, but like,
Are there?
he's just subjective.
Well, you said he sucks, so I took that to mean you didn't care for him, and that's fine. The point I was making
he
is,
just sucks. Maybe not in like. I mean, somewhere in character, mostly in character, but just like
yeah,
from appearance-wise,
yeah.
and the way he holds himself.
Well,
And how he acts. If you saw him in real life, you'd be like, man, that guy kind of sucks.
yeah. Well, and again, like kind of what the angle we're taking at it.
You almost feel sorry for him in a way.
Maybe. But again, it's this question of expectation. It's this question of how should he be? How is he supposed to be?
I think
And-
he disappoints both sides.
Yeah, well, because he doesn't take a side,
Yeah.
right? Again, we're back to this question of even if he's your enemy, well, then now you can measure yourself according to the standards that we have about enemies, right? But he doesn't do that, and yeah, maybe people in the book, about potential readers, I don't know, find that somewhat infuriating to not be able to place him. Like, and this is a very 2021 mentality. He's either on our side or he's not, sort of thing, with how we view the world or how it should be, and he won't take a side.
And I mean, it's somewhat, I don't want to say amiable, but it's like, well, he's doing what's best for himself personally.
Is he?
Even though there isn't.
Is
that
he doing
much.
anything good for himself? I'm asking.
There's something in chapter 7
Okay.
where we actually see Billy make an actual decision for himself.
I would be shocked. While you're looking for that, I was going to mention this. I stumbled upon this while I was looking at my notes for today because I couldn't find it last time. I asked
Oh
you.
yeah, he openly chooses when they're talking about the syrup. He openly chooses that when he finds a spoon I guess a choice
To do what?
to make a spoonful of the syrup and like steal it for himself.
Is that a choice? He's vitamin deficient. He's malnourished. He's staring at syrup.
What you're saying is he's being pushed by his own natural drive.
His body. Yeah. And then he shares it with Derby, who's at the window. It's a beautiful scene because like Derby cries when he gets the thing in his mouth, you know. But again, even that is like an emotional response and a physical response to the shit that your body just needs and hasn't had for so long.
If you're going in that case, then do any of us make actual decisions on our part then?
Well, I think Vonnegut kind of begs that question. Vonnegut asks that question a lot in a lot of his books. But no, even when Billy, we get the scene at one point when Billy proposes to his wife, and he kind of snaps to in the middle of it, and he's like, oh, what am I doing? And he just goes through with it. That's how he proposes to her. So even that is absolutely not a choice, right? He talks about his disease. He has some kind of a disease, Billy sort of recognizes. But anyway, where were we? I forget now. Oh, there's one more little thing I want to highlight for you. Again, I told you, be kind of shallow dives today, but these are interesting moments that I don't want you to miss, and we have a bit of time. Here on 202, we are again in Dresden. They are in the slaughterhouse, Billy and the rest. Billy and Derby and Gluck have been tasked with going to get food for everybody, and they get lost, because of course they do. And they stumble upon, the narrator calls them young girls. Now keep in mind, when Vonnegut published this, it was in the early 60s, he was like 40 plus, 50-ish, give or take. I believe young girls he means 17, 18, 19, something, Just, they're not 12 is my point.
Yeah, no.
Different scene. Anyway, they stumble upon some young girls in the shower. And this is the part that's interesting. The girls screamed, they covered themselves with their hands and turned their backs and so on, and made themselves utterly beautiful. And it's that verb especially, they make themselves beautiful. He does not say that they are. They make themselves by doing what?
Covering themselves up.
Yeah. That's weird. I think that's atypical of how we're used to hearing that word used. Why do you think that is? How does that make them beautiful?
There's several connotations to this. They openly say that none of them have ever seen an undressed woman before, except for Derby.
What's that got to do with it?
I don't know. Whenever I think of that scene, I always think of like portraits and artworks of like by the Romans.
Women screaming?
What?
Said women screaming?
No, of when they show women in art, they've always got their backs turned.
I think they're usually full frontal, actually, in my recollection. Well, look, what we got to focus on, again, think of the construction of the sentence. They make themselves beautiful. What he is telling us with that phrasing is the act of, makes them beautiful in that moment. You see what I'm saying? And again, that's weird, but I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I'm just curious if you guys have a beat on what the narrator is saying when he points to that and says that's beautiful, that they do that they're like, and
I think it's supposed to show how, how showing that they have some amount of modesty and.
Yeah. Well, for instance, if you were in the shower and somebody how would you react?
What the hell?
You'd react kind of the same, right? Some version of screaming, whatever it might be from you, and some version of right? Why? Why would,
Reaction.
Yeah, but why do we react that way in the shower? Especially in the shower.
Societal norms?
Yeah.
We feel exposed.
Absolutely. You're pretty. That's why the opening of Psycho, spoilers, is so fucking scary. She gets stabbed in the shower. You're defenseless. You're naked and wet,
You're at your most vulnerable.
For sure. And somebody comes in on that. It's not supposed to be there. You're vulnerable. Well, isn't screaming and covering and all that, isn't that announcing your vulnerability just in that moment? That's one idea. The narrator finds the announcing of that vulnerability, the acknowledgement of it, to be beautiful for some kind of a reason. There's another possibility. Now, we've already said, if someone busts in for any kind of a reason, good reason, bad reason, really doesn't matter. If they show up and you're in the shower, we're all reacting round about the same way. If a dog's in the shower and you bust in, how's the dog going to react?
Oh,
Yeah.
you're here.
Not really, not gonna, whoo, and then, right? None of it from the dog? Why? Why do we react differently from how the dog would?
We got like bigger brains or something.
Yeah, I mean, the dog is unbothered for all kinds of reasons.
Been taught like
It's
shame.
an animal. It has
For sure.
natural instincts.
I mean, I would lean more toward taught, but anyway, the point is, this is also a particularly human response,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No matter what the exigence of that, fancy word, go ahead and look it up if you want. That's something only we do. Dog wouldn't do it. Used to have a cat that would get in the shower, wild. Not bothered with the fact that they're naked all the time. Only we are that vulnerable in that space, right? I think back to how the narrator talks about Lot's wife, to being human, what it means. I think that's in play here too. I think he thinks that's beautiful. They're like announcing their humanity when they do that, right? I just thought it was interesting. All right, those are my shallow dives. I have a few other things I want to point out to you, have you consider, but I mentioned at the top of all this, I was going to open the floor. Anything at all that you found potentially interesting, or you had questions, especially if you have questions about something. I would like to clear up any like confusions, if we could. Anything at all.
There was something from last chapter that I didn't think that we really got to talk about
Okay.
enough, and that was the propaganda guy.
Oh yeah, well actually, I mean he was in my notes. We do that. Campbell. Yeah, 164. We could do that. This is a Nazi propagandist, Howard W. Campbell. He's an American as well, though. He's also, to my memory, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, I've read this book a bunch, he's the only guy we actually call a Nazi. Everybody else is German. He's the only Nazi.
Because he's an American who embraced the betrayer, I guess.
Well, and you think about all the Germans you run into. If they're soldiers or other people, we would call them Nazis because they're in Nazi Germany. But none of them, for the most part, are like wearing the armband and fucking, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
they just happen to be in Nazi Germany. He's the only one we really run into who rocks the uniform and espouses some of it. You know what I'm saying? Like he's bought in, it seems like, where
Yeah.
a lot of the other folks we meet,
Just there by coincidence.
yeah,
By location.
by fate,
Location.
yeah. What did you? I mean, I have thoughts on him, but
Well, two things.
Yeah.
First of all, his propaganda thing is kind of brutally honest.
perhaps. I mean, you always have to be careful because propagandist is a fancy word for what? Does anybody know? What's a propagandist's job? What is
Lying.
propaganda? Yeah, he's a salesman.
Yeah.
He's a salesman.
But, when he talks about, like, how American troops, it's sort of that thing of, like, stereotypes existing because they are based off of true behaviors in some cases. He talks about the American servicemen, and then you see them, and it's like, well, I don't want to say he's right,
Okay. Well,
but they do you see how the British react to the American
Yeah.
soldiers, and then you see his,
and to be fair, we only see one group of American soldiers, right?
yeah.
The other point I would make is kind of what you're getting at there. We got to go a little bit back because all of his stuff, you're later in his little screed. He goes on for a couple pages. if you turn the page to 164, all of his ideas, at least here, seem to stem from like a fundamental theory he has about America and how it works. He says, like, America is the wealthiest nation on earth, but its people are mainly poor. Poor Americans are urged to hate themselves. Speaking later in the same paragraph on poor people, he says they mock themselves and glorify their betters, meaning the rich. The meanest, which means the lowest, eating or drinking establishment owned by a man who is himself poor is very likely to have a sign on its wall asking this cruel question: if you're so smart, why ain't you rich? All of his stuff, in one way or another, seems to come back to this notion of sort of what we would call now the wage gap, but even deeper than that. His point,
Sort of meritocratic in a way.
well, yeah, his point is not just why the wage gap exists, but more importantly, how we consider ourselves as a part of it, right? Because we have this idea, even now, and they definitely had it in the 60s, of the American dream. What's the American dream? Somebody help me out. You know this one. You start out poor.
Start a war, come home, marry a girl, have a house, white picket fence, 2 kids.
How are you successful in the American dream? What do you have to do? Huh?
Well,
Yeah, how do you get it? You only got to do
Hard
one
work.
thing. You just work hard. You put the time in, you put the effort in, you move up, right? We have social mobility, economic mobility. We still got that idea kicking around. He claims, this Nazi propagandist, that that's not really the reality of the situation. He talks about, and I'm paraphrasing now, but his idea is poor folks generally are taught that they're poor because they're deficient in some kind of a way, and then they will stay poor because they think they're not worthy of being better, of having money, of being successful. We have to at least entertain this idea because he goes on and on about it. It's a couple pages. What do you guys think about that? Do we have that at all? Is he wrong? Like, what do you think?
It's a mixed bag. I'm sure there are definitely people in America who think that way.
What way? Like, I'm asking you to explain yourself a little bit.
Like self-deprecating.
In what sense?
Of like, well, like it says, if you're so smart, why ain't you rich?
Yeah. The question is, do we have that idea?
I have to say yes, but also no. It's all dependent on the person.
It's always dependent on the person. I hate it when you guys. I'm only coming hard at you on that because you all do that in your papers. It always depends on the person.
It's not wrong. It's not.
Well, it's banal.
Yeah.
Does everyone run over turtles in their car? No.
No.
It
Does
depends on the
everyone think that way?
person.
No.
Some sick
But
fuck
if you're going to
does.
say that in America we have that idea,
We
yes.
do. That's all. Yeah, we do. I got a family full of people who believe that shit. I grew up poor. Yeah, we got that kicking around for sure. We celebrate rich folks because they're
Glamorous, they can do things that we can't.
but kind of baked into that a lot of the time is this idea that they're successful because they've earned it in some way, or they're more capable in some way. And that may be true in some cases. You got like a Warren Buffett, he seems like he knows his shit. That's not true in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. You have a whole bunch of people who yeah.
What is
For
that?
every one person that you're just like, yes, he like earned their wealth and stuff. There's like 10 others that are just like, you just got it because your dad or your grandfather
Well, it's
was
the
rich.
notion, if you start with money, look, we could all agree on this, I think. If you start with money, you start with advantages. Fair?
Yeah.
Fair? I'm not saying that that's the case is fair, but I'm saying that's a real thing.
Yes, that is true.
That's part of his point, is we disregard that, I think, a lot in our country. We pretend like that's not true. There's a metaphor I love. You have a guy who's born on third, but then acts like he did it all himself when he crosses home plate. Like, we have that sometimes. That's what he's talking about. Now, what's interesting to me, I happen to agree with that idea, and I told you I grew up poor because I want to announce my bias about that particular argument. I am biased in that, okay? Isn't it weird that Vonnegut puts, like, whether you agree or disagree with it, a halfway decent point into the mouth of a Nazi propagandist? Isn't that strange?
Well, that's how they get you. Basically, when it comes to like the craziest, the craziest conspiracies,
Yeah.
like there is some like little bit of truth
Some
that's.
truth. Well, that's a pretty big truth, but what are you gonna say, Don?
Yeah, sure. Because they might be able to put a halfway decent idea.
Yeah,
Yeah. Doesn't mean that their ideas are any better.
for sure. And importantly, he doesn't really, in this screed, ever come out and say, by the way, we should start gassing people and fucking, he doesn't do that, which rightfully you would acknowledge is probably some pretty negative notions they had at the time in that country.
Who's to say that they don't have that in Germany? Maybe that same sort of idea.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, the idea that there will always be people who are born with wealth who think that they did it all themselves, and people who will glorify that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very old, which is to say, we get it from Europe, idea that people who are beautiful or successful are somehow morally superior. Well, that's very old. Goes
That's where the term goody two shoes comes from.
Well, no, I mean, it goes back to Shakespeare. It's super old. So yes. But again, I think what's important here is we have, and we had then, the American dream. Like, that's us. It's in the title. But he's kind of calling that into question, right? Like, that's our we can hang our hat on that. And he's saying, yeah, but we don't actually use it. It's just like for show kind of thing.
Yep. I'm reminded of this phrase I once heard when describing describing the American dream. Like anyone here could be a billionaire, but not everyone can. Everyone can't succeed, or else there's no point. And to me that and at the surface you're just like, yeah, all right, I guess that's true. But if you really start to think about it, you're just like, so wait, every person, no matter how morally good
it's depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, every person, no matter how morally good or morally bad they are, there are some people that will just never be able to have a comfortable life, even though they're good people. So
We've talked about this before in Body and Soul. If you remember that conversation about Mickey Mantle. Now they were talking about baseball, but of course baseball is a metaphor in that poem for the lives these guys have.
Like, listen, there will always be sad poor people.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be people with advantages and disadvantages, right? I guess, is kind of what we're getting at.
It's one of those great existential metaphysical concepts that we all choose to ignore. It's like there will always be third world countries.
Well, I think Campbell makes the point that we're not ignoring it; we've embraced it.
Yeah.
We've accepted it as a given. I mean, that's kind of how you're talking about it, right? So again, my real question is, why give a decent point to a Nazi in this book? That's something Vonnegut decided to do. He's like, he could have anybody say this. He could have Billy somehow say it, or the narrator. He's like, no.
I'm just like, have Billy somehow say it. Yeah, somehow. Like,
Well,
I don't think he's
sure.
But anyways,
Why give that to a Nazi?
I think they give it to a Nazi because it shows, like, with a good idea like that, like a good sensible argument actually being in there, in a cavalcade of stuff that is that's just completely just insane and dehumanizing so many people.
Sure.
It shows how people can fall for it. It shows how that it shows that out in the midst of all that. Of all those terrible ideas that people are like, no, that's ridiculous. There's some amount of truth to it, and
You can agree with some of this Nazi's points.
yes, and of course when you phrase it like that, you're like,
No, I just said it on camera. Yeah, how bummed am I?
yeah, that's terrible, but
Yeah.
But I guess maybe that's.
What's the
point.
purpose of that?
It's-
Can he have a reason for doing that? For 2 pages going, well, that Nazi's got a point.
I mean,
Is it at all similar?
there's good or bad. There's good and bad on both sides.
Okay, so now we're saying that it's not necessarily so simple. Not all Nazis, even this guy, again, who's the only person in the book we refer to as a Nazi.
It's never simple.
He's got a ridiculous uniform, but he's not a Bond villain. Like, he's not, with the scar and the eye. And there's more to him than that.
It's not that dude out of Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, like most of them can still be awful, but he's got this kernel of. That's a fair point. That's a fair observation.
But like you say, that point could have been made by anyone.
Yeah, but again, but my point in saying that is, I think it's purposeful that Vonnegut gives it to a Nazi to have us admit that he's still a person, capable of.
rational thought.
And if you make a point like that, you're kind of coming out against it, right? Like you're saying it's an issue. So that suggests he's interested in the plight of the poor all of a sudden, like.
I mean, it's an anti-war book.
Yeah. All right.
States that.
Couple more things. These are things I just want on your radar. I gave this list to my first class, and they missed pretty much all of them. So I'm interested to see how you did. I'm going to ask first. There's a lot of repetition in this book of weird little things, like little images and phenomena that you'll miss. But about the third or fourth time they get repeated, you'll be like, what the hell? Why do we keep saying that?
The freaking, something I thought was really weird.
Yeah.
The, what did they call it? The blood gutters.
Okay.
It was on Weary's knife.
Yeah.
And then it's on the bayonet of the German kid.
Yeah.
The musket. And I thought, that is really weird.
That's-
to bring something from that earlier
Yeah.
in the book.
It's a very specific noun, a blood gutter, one you hope never to run into. Yeah.
I thought it was weird.
I'll give you that one. Okay. That one's probably less pronounced than some of these other ones, but I'll give you that one. You do, context would say you're going to run into some blood gutters in World War II, but yes. Anything else you guys may have noticed? Because again, I have a list. This is the shittiest magic trick you'll ever see. Okay. The color orange and black, those come up a lot. Billy's tent in his backyard the night he gets abducted, like his daughter's wedding, right, is orange and black, as is the train he's on when he's a POW to let bombers know not to bomb it. That color is going to come a lot. Feet being ivory and blue,
Yep.
like they're dead. Billy's are a lot. You'll
Dead
find some
hobos.
bodies. Yeah, the ivory and blue comes up a lot with feet specifically. The horse picture
Oh.
comes up several times. And look, we're never, unless you guys just want to at some point, gonna get super in detail with that picture. I assume you all know what picture I'm talking about, because it's pretty memorable. But it keeps coming up. It's the sort of thing that, like, if you slip it in more than once, that picture, people notice. But that's weird. Wild Bob comes up a couple times. The limericks, the Lord's Prayer comes up several times. He'll just drop it in weird little spots. That's the God grant me that whole thing, the Lord's Prayer. You do not, and we can't really have this conversation until you read the rest of the book. You do not have to have an answer for why we're repeating all those things right now, but I wanted you aware that they are absolutely getting repeated a lot. And hopefully at this point now you'll start to notice them as you go forward, but There's more. That's not an exhaustive list. That's just like the ones that came to mind off the top of my head. There's a lot of like weird little images getting repeated all the time in the book. And it's either next time or next week we'll have a conversation because something's gonna happen. I'm not gonna tell you, but something's gonna happen with that, which is pretty interesting. Before I move on to, yeah, because we need to. Is there anything else? There's one more thing we have to do in this class before we go, but is there anything else about the book, again, comes to mind, or you had a question about, or anything at all? It's okay if not, because we are at this point a little pressed for time, but I wanted to ask.
I have no idea how I'm gonna write a paper on this thing.
Okay, well, it's an informative synthesis. It's not quite the same as the first. This is going to be much more, you're going to find articles, they're going to help direct your conversation. It's not going to be totally dependent on you.
Like, I've got 23 days to write this. I have no idea where it
Nah,
was.
you're good. We got to finish it first, and we're getting there. Yes.
Wait, so, and also that article that you did give us on
Jarvis, yeah.
We still have to use that as
You'll
well.
have to use that one. And we'll talk about her next week. But she wrote specifically about the book. And she has ideas that will come in super handy, again, in terms of guiding our conversation about it. But we'll get to her.
Is that important?
Yes. And I guess I'll go ahead and tell you this. You don't have to read that whole article. Some of you will go click it right now and be like, it's how long? We're only reading half of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because the other half is about another book that's actually crazier than this one. So
It's also by Vonnegut?
no. No, it's Gravity's Rainbow. It's a guy named Thomas Pynchon. Vonnegut, whatever you think of him, writes like a person that makes sense. Thomas Pynchon,
Does not. It's the total opposite.
kind of.
Oh.
Yeah. Like for real, he has a book called The Crying of Lot 49, and if you are not focused the whole time, you will get totally fucking lost in that book. You're like, I don't know what's happening.
It's one of those books where every word is important.
It's a bunch of people doing drugs in LA,
Oh.
but it reads like that. Anyway,
It reads like people just like just like they took a bunch of drugs and then just wrote down what happened while they
not
were
quite like
high.
that, but anyway, don't worry about Crying of Lot 49. It's a whole other thing. And I didn't assign it, so you're welcome. The last thing I want to talk to you about, revision. I recorded a video, I put it up on YouTube, I put it up on CourseDen. It's been there since Thursday, I think. Thursday or Friday. I haven't gone to see how many people have viewed it because that would just bum me out, but it's there, all right? Which is my way of saying your paper grades are up, your feedback is up, all of these things are available to you. If you would like to revise, it's optional. I think most everybody should. If you would like to revise, it's due next Tuesday, the 28th, by midnight, okay? This is on the syllabus. It's on turnitin.com. You just scroll down. That's enough to hide it from you guys, by the way. It's been there the whole time. It's right there. You turn in a new document. I have to say all this because somebody won't if I don't say it. Somebody still might. You have to turn in a new document, okay, if you're going to revise. The ground rules, and again, all this is in the video, but people don't watch it. So if you do better on the revision, I just replace your grade. I don't average them. I just replace your grade, okay? Typically, on average, people do about 5 points better, okay? Some people don't do better, by the way. If you don't do better or you do worse, I keep your same grade. But if you do better, and by the way, and I'll come to you, every semester somebody will do 10 points better, 20 points better. It does happen. That's harder to swing, but it does happen. I replace your grade. I replace it. So this is, I cannot stress this enough, kind of a big deal for some of you. Like if you looked at your first paper grade and got really bummed out, I am sorry about that. You have another shot. I don't know how else to put it. You have a real shot, if you like. Yes.
And how many words does the paper have to be for the revision?
It's got to be 3 pages, same as the original. Some of you have a funny idea about what 3 pages means, by the way. That means within spitting distance of the bottom of the 3rd page. For whatever reason, several of you assumed that meant if you were creeping onto the 3rd page, that that's 3 pages. How very silly of you. Yeah. Technically, and I used to have professors like this, you think about it, Your first page in MLA, almost half of it is that damn header that takes up everything and your title. I had teachers that would tell us, oh, you need to be that far down on the 4th page for like a 3-page paper, which is true. But I'm gonna give you that. Get to the bottom of the 3rd page. Stop being silly. Anyway, so I want to remind you of a couple things before I cut you loose with all this, okay? Number 1, you have your grade on Turnitin. You have a rubric, which will help you a little bit when it comes to understanding what you got on your paper. You also have feedback from me. I left everybody a voice note. It's 3 minutes of my dulcet tones. I'm being silly right now, but I'm just talking to you about your paper. It's worth checking out. Even if you're not gonna revise, because you're gonna write more papers. But especially if you revise, please go look at the feedback. You have any question?
And where is this all in?
Turnitin.com. Your view is a little different from mine, but you should be able to click on your paper. And then you have a little Tetris looking guy on the side. Does anybody not know what that means? Okay. It's like little blocks on the menu. You click that, that'll open up the rubric, which you can expand, and it'll open up a thing where you can play my voice note. And that'll be me talking at you about your paper. You had a question, ma'am?
Are you going to give us an opportunity to revise all our other essays or just this essay?
Just the first 2. The 3rd paper will be turned at the end of the semester, and ideally we'll never look at each other again. So, I mean that in the best possible ways. You'll be sick of me by then if you're not already. But yeah, your first 2 you will. I try not to mention that second one, so I appreciate that. But that's just not your fault. Fair question. Okay, but look, so the video exists also. I go over not just the stuff I gave to you just now, but for about 10 or 15 minutes in the video, I look at a classmate's paper who had many of the issues I saw in many of the papers. Not everything in that video will apply to you in your paper, but chances are good some of it will. It'd be worth looking at too if you're going to revise. All right? Last couple things I want to remind you of, and then I'll let you go. Well, after I talk to you about homework. You guys are freaking me out packing up. We still got 10 minutes. Number 1, intros. If you struggled with a thesis, that's what the rubric will say. Chances are good, at least in part, this was a struggle with your roadmap. And I told you guys this would happen. Breaking down your ideas, explaining how they work, not just on their own, but together. Because again, ideally, you want your arguments to build to that thesis. Well, that's what the roadmap is for. And if you didn't have that, it's possible some of you still had a decent thesis, okay? But usually, if your roadmap is shit, your thesis suffers. That's just how it works. Not always, but often. If your thesis is not great, start with that roadmap first. That's going to help you. Many of you, I said something to the effect of, your thesis right now, that's actually the start to your roadmap. Make that the start to your roadmap and pursue that. Talk to me for sentences about that idea. That'll get you to a real thesis in many cases. Other things I want to remind you of very quickly. The 3 I's. Your 1101 teacher may have called it something else, but it all works the same. You need topic sentences. Many of you didn't even attempt those. You need evidence. You got to limit your evidence, but then you got to talk about it in the way that we talked about it in class. Talk to me about language. Pick out specific details, whatever they are, right? Don't quote for ideas. Some of you didn't do that stuff. You got to try this time. Lastly, banal claims. And look, the best example I can think of, because I saw quite a few of these, something like a thesis writing about old men playing basketball. The speaker is worried because he's getting old. And it's like, yeah. Of course he is. Getting old sucks. It's banal. And the rest of your paper suffers because then you're forcing yourself to argue, to prove to me that the speaker doesn't want to get old. Do you know how hard that? No wonder you can't write 3 pages. There's nothing that needs said about that. Do you see what I'm saying? Now again, in that particular example, the fix would be you got to get way more specific. Why doesn't he want to get old? There's all kinds of reasons. He has very, very specific ones in that poem that he tells us about pretty explicitly, right? So you talk about those. All of a sudden, you're not banal now. It's almost always a question of details and specificity, though. Okay? Okay, for next time, Vonnegut chapter 8. You also have a discussion board. I'm just reminding you of what we have coming up. You have a discussion board post due on Monday that you are free to look at if you want. I tell you these things. We're reading Vonnegut chapter 8 for Wednesday. We are finishing the book for Monday's class. And you have that little bit of a homework assignment. If I were in your position and I wanted to revise, which I almost always did, I would try to get a little bit ahead at some point. Going into the weekend or early in the weekend, I would try to have the book read personally. I would try to knock the homework out. And that would give me the rest of the time to figure out the damn revision, right? That's what I would do. I don't know your life, I don't know your schedule, whatever. But look ahead to the next couple classes, especially up until the revision's due. If that's something you want to do, you gotta figure out how to navigate that. But you do have some time. And with that, I will let you go. I'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you.